I want to say hello to all the men and women who have joined us today for this fantastic discussion that we're going to have about women in technology, which is our organization as part of the Innovate organization. We're going to be discussing the impact of AI on the lives and rights of women and underserved communities. Hi, my name is Randi Levin. I am the CEO of the Women in Tech Accelerator. I'm a current White House technology advisor, and I am the former NASA JPL Chief Information Officer. We have an esteemed panel today where they will all be introducing themselves, all from UCLA, from Davida to Dr. Noble to Dr. Roberts. If we could go to the next slide, I'd like to just talk about the registrant responses. We had put out a questionnaire prior to the beginning of this presentation and want to just go over the results briefly. So the first question was, what excites you the most about the potential of AI? And in this graph on the left, the blue was the highest, which was increased productivity and efficiency, which I thought was an interesting answer because certainly we are seeing that now today, and that will continue. But to me, some of the best things about AI are all the original content that's being created from there and how that's going to benefit humanity. And we'll hear about some of that today. What aspects of AI concern you the most? And it's almost a tie between the blue and the yellow, but the blue is bias and algorithms, and the yellow was potential errors. And I think this is certainly a valid concern and something that we need to keep our eye on. And then the bottom graph, I forgot what that question was. Oh, here it is. What is your main motivation for participating in Innovate with events? And the orange bar, the red bar said leveraging opportunities. So we would also love your feedback at the end of this session as well, because we are really big on giving really great content to all the people that come to our events. So with that, I am going to turn this over to Davida Johnson, who is the moderator today for our panel.
Thank you, Randi. Good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure for you to be here and for me to be here. My name is Davida Johnson, and I'm the Interim Executive Director for the UCLA Office of Advanced Research Computing and the program sponsor for Innovate at UCLA, which is a longstanding UCLA partnership. We're going on about 45 years with the Southern California tech community. And I have the honor of introducing and speaking with our two distinguished panelists today to discuss this very important topic. With the sudden advent of Gen AI, we are presented with both opportunities as well as challenges. Today, we will explore the importance of paying attention to the challenges as well as you are thinking about integrating this technology into your organizations. I will say that there are about 70 different companies that have signed up, representing 70 different companies and organizations today. So there's a broad group of people here listening to this very important information. I have the opportunity and the pleasure to begin the session with an introduction of Dr. Noble and Dr. Roberts. Dr. Safiya Noble is the David O. Sears Presidential Endowed Chair of Social Sciences and Professor of Gender Studies, African American Studies, and Information Studies at UCLA. She is the director of the Center on Race and Digital Justice and co-director of the Minderoo Initiative on Tech and Power at the UCLA Center for Critical Internet Inquiry. She currently serves as one of 3 interim faculty directors for the Data X Initiative at UCLA, leading work on critical data studies for the campus. And in 2021, she founded a nonprofit called the Equity Engine to accelerate investment in companies, education, and networks driven by women of color. Professor Noble is the author of the best-selling book on racist and sexist algorithmic harm in commercial search engines, entitled Algorithms of Oppression, How Search Engines Reinforce Racism, which has been widely reviewed in scholarly and popular publications. Safiya's work has been referenced in many articles, including Time Magazine, Vox, and others, giving national and international exposure to this issue. And in 2021, she was recognized as a MacArthur Foundation Fellow for her groundbreaking work on algorithmic discrimination. I also have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Sarah T. Roberts, who is an associate professor at UCLA in gender studies, information studies, and labor studies, specializing in internet and social media policy, infrastructure, politics, and culture, and the intersection of media, technology, and society. She is the faculty director and co-founder of the UCLA Center for Critical Internet Inquiry, co-director of the Minderoo Initiative on Technology and Power, and a research associate of the Oxford Internet Institute. Dr. Roberts researches information, work, and workers, and is a leading global authority on commercial content moderation, the term that which she coined to describe those who work, the work of those responsible for making sure media content posted to major commercial social media platforms fall within legal, ethical, and the site's own guidelines and standards. She is frequently consulted on matters of policy, worker welfare, and governance related to content moderation issues and the broader social media landscape. Additionally, she has experience in the industry as a consultant and researcher, most recently working as a staff researcher for Twitter in 2022. In 2023, she made the list of 100 brilliant women in AI ethics. This is just a small snippet of their work and accomplishments, but I thank both of these ladies for being here today. All right, so we can go to the screen. We can take, thank you very much. All right, thank you, Safiya and Sarah, for being here. So why don't we get started? Can you describe, I'd like for both of you to describe your backgrounds in tech and how this informed and shifted your life direction as researchers, studying the impacts of technology on people, specifically women and underrepresented communities. Safiya, you're pointing to Sarah. Sarah, you want to start us off?
Sure. Thanks for having me today. It's really a pleasure to be among so many esteemed guests and working with you today. I can talk a little bit about my own background. I have been on the internet for over 30 years as a user of the social internet. There was a social internet before Facebook. And in many ways, perhaps was superior to what we have now. I have a background in the humanities in my early academic preparation, studying French, Spanish, language and literature, history, and gender studies. But I was always interested in computers from an early age, and in part, if you can believe it or not, where I grew up in Madison, Wisconsin, the University of Wisconsin's computer science department used to run a summer camp for kids that was free of charge. And my mother, who was an employee of the university at the time, needed something to do with me while she was at work. And so I started attending this summer camp in the computer science department. I think about our context today and the idea of computer scientists running a summer camp is wild, and maybe we need to bring it back. But that put me at a very early age in touch with some of the first personal computers when they were transitioning into being available for home use and for use by people outside of research and development contexts. So I was an early user of the Apple II, for example. And I think that, the early exposure to computers, while I had this other set of interests that seemed to be completely separated from computation and activity in that realm, at some point led me to feel a certain bifurcation or a certain inability to make those things connect. But the truth is that they connect in every way possible, because computers are tools that we build as humans to aid our human endeavor and activity. And there's nothing more humanist than that, as far as I'm concerned. it also wasn't very fashionable to be a young girl interested in computers when I was growing up. And maybe many of you on this webinar have had that experience as well. So it's something I had to sublimate for a long time because I didn't understand how to make that socially acceptable, or really to even access computers once I got a bit older. But by the time I was in college, the early internet was available. If you knew how to get an account within the computer science department. So I went and got myself a Unix account, and I bought a modem, and I began exploring online life very early on. And I would say it transformed my life in many ways, and it set me on the course that I've been on ever since. My early experience as a professional, however, was a bit less storied, in the sense that I took a job right after my undergraduate time as an academic technologist at a major private university in the Southeast. And I was riding, I thought, the wave of the Internet 1.0 commercialization, when computers were becoming central to activity on university campuses for all students, not just for those in the STEM fields. And yet I found myself in a role that was decidedly unglamorous and certainly not lucrative. And I asked myself a lot of questions, like, if I have these specialized skills and this specialized knowledge that I'm told I have, why can't I make ends meet? Why is it so hard to use those skills to advance my own career? Geez, maybe it's structural. Maybe there are some structural barriers in place. I wonder what those are. I need to think about those things. Unfortunately, on my job, my bosses weren't really interested in entertaining those questions. So after about a decade in that capacity, I returned to school. And quickly, I had just gone back for a master's degree because I thought that would help my employment prospects. But I very quickly realized that I needed to pursue a PhD in some of the very kinds of questions I had when I was a worker in the technology field, and even earlier on. I think back to an earlier experience at that computer summer camp when we were visited by a gentleman who had a nonprofit in the area. He was a man who was blind, and he was using computers and early screen readers and so on to do a whole host of things that we would think of as adaptive or assistive technologies now. His company was called, quite simply, Computers to Help People. And I think about that all the time. In fact, I just bought a t-shirt for $40 off of Etsy that was from this company from about 1980, Computers to Help People. And so I think, in a way, I was formed in a time when there was so much potential for how we thought computers might positively impact humanity. But I also lived through a time of great commercialization of those potentials, which frankly, in many ways, portended a narrowing of those possibilities, or at least a narrowing of who might serve to benefit. And so the work that I do today, I think, is greatly informed by all of those experiences. And we'll talk about it more, but that is probably why my focus, although it's on all manners of computation and the internet, to include AI, certainly, fundamentally comes back to people. And I'll just mention that I decided to do my PhD at the University of Illinois' iSchool, and it was on a visit to the iSchool before I even matriculated that I met the future Dr. Safiya Noble, who was also going to be matriculating into that PhD class. So we've been through a lot, and I'm going to pass the mic to Dr. Noble now.
Yes, we do go way back, don't we? And it's interesting because we have similar origin stories, even though, I'm I was living and coming up in a different part of the country. I grew up in Fresno, California. I went to Fresno State. I'm like a product of California public schools and public education before I went to Illinois for grad school. And I can tell you that similarly, my mother, she and her best friend, they were both graphic designers and typesetters in the 1980s. And the two of them drove to San Francisco somewhere circa 1986 and bought the first two Apple II computers, desktop computers, and brought them back to Fresno, and were the first two in desktop publishing in our city. And it's so interesting for me, this origin story of the history of computing, especially personal computing. I was always exposed to that being women who were really using desktop computing to build small businesses, to make publications in their communities, to do all kinds of art, quite frankly, in computing. And I probably was not a good predictor of the future back then. I feel like I'm a little bit better at it now, but I will tell you that in 1989, I think I got my first university email at Fresno State, and thought to myself, well, who would ever want to sit at a computer all day and type emails? And I hold by that is still true. Most people do not want to do that with their lives, even though here we are. But these ideas of kind of computing and computers being a part of this kind of coming of age story for me as an undergraduate in high school are also kind of salient here, and they are formative for me professionally. And I'm sorry, there's an iPad ringing in the background. That's my son's, and I just can't get to it at summer break. It's a spring break, so we all know how that is. I will say that professionally, when I graduated from Fresno State, I was a sociology major, again, also thinking about this intersection between technology and computing and society very early on. The kinds of people that I was friends with were, we were on the internet before the graphic user interface, exchanging with, people who were organizing against other students, organizing against apartheid, for example, in South Africa, and really being globally connected and understanding this kind of global bulletin board system of communication that I know Sarah also had a lot of experience with. So these were the ways in which I also imagine these new technologies working in service of building networks of care and responsibility and activism and response to pressing social problems in our world. I went after, undergrad, I went to work at a very large household brand telecommunications company that was providing, early ISP to homes. I was on the ground floor of standing up community technology centers. This is before we had computing at home, and people would go to these places. I know that the students only see this in the movies, but you would go to a cafe or a place that had computers, kind of like the library now, the public library, and you would use a computer for a little while. And that really formed my understanding also of things like, the digital divide and what it meant that, people like me who were, we were by no means, we were barely middle class and had a computer at home, and people who were increasingly going to be more and more dependent upon access to computing technology at home and did not have it at home, and young people. And of course, that was remaking education and how are we getting kids exposure to computers. So the through line of my life has always been about these kind of issues of justice and equity and fairness in computing. By the time I got to graduate school and was looking at things like algorithms and AI and how those were inherently also unequal and unfair, that was a very difficult, I'll just say, argument to make. And Sarah was there on the front row. The two of us were taking up issues around technology workers, questioning the fundamental premise of how computing works at a extremely unpopular moment. In fact, there are a lot of phrases that circulate in the world now that were phrases we were inventing, quite frankly, at Illinois ourselves and our colleagues as graduate students, saying things like, arguing that algorithms, for example, could discriminate or that there was bias in algorithms. I mean, I have to tell you that the first time I said that, well, that was a way to effectively not find any dissertation committee members, because no one at in those days, more than a decade ago, was willing to stake their career on such a claim. Because if you think back to 2009, 10, 11, 12, people, first of all, think words like algorithms were explicitly computer science jargon. They were not in the lexicon of the public. And to argue that they were value laden was in essence, I don't know, it was like some type of, well, my colleagues would say it was some type of career suicide, because that was a preposterous idea, because the way that algorithms were thought of is just kind of purely mathematical, and that math is value free. Math could never be racist or sexist because it's math. And of course, what I was talking about was the application of mathematical ideations and complex decision trees that were full of all kinds of decisions about what to privilege and what to foreground and recede to the background, or even obliterate. And to make those things legible is really the work that I've done for the past decade. So much so that truly now phrases like algorithmic discrimination or algorithmic harm are really, I consider myself, and I think others do, part of the origin story of that kind of logic existing. And so now we have a lot more evidence of harm, and we have a lot more we have to put our arms around to figure out how we're going to contend with it. And I think that's really what's brought me to this conversation with you today.
Thank you both. Well, first of all, thank you for the work that you've done in decades of research in this area. And my next question is, now that you have done this research over decades, are you seeing that things are still the same? As you're uncovering things with the onset of Gen AI, what is your take on how digital bias is represented today, or what's the strength of it today?
Well, I'll jump in here and just say that I think the more things change, the more things stay the same. There is no question that the kinds of things, for example, that I was uncovering in search engines are replicated and worsened by the new technologies that are emergent from those architectures and those systems. So if you think about something like, a lot of documentation that I did about how harm happens in a search engine toward minoritized populations, toward women, LGBTQ, people of color, people who might be ethnic, religious, sexual minorities, how we are vulnerable to these systems. Well, if you think about new forms of technology like generative AI, multiple forms, they're using those same architectures and bodies of data and logics, and putting those things, that, let's say, obfuscating those harms even more so. And I think that's one of the things that deeply troubles me. I mean, I think more than a decade ago, when most of our colleagues were trying to get issues of concern on the radar of agencies, regulatory agencies like the FCC, and so much focus on things like Section 230, and I'm sure Sarah will talk about that. I was arguing that these were issues that should be on the radar of the Federal Trade Commission, that these were harmful consumer products. And I remember writing that in my dissertation, and so many people saying, like, what are you talking about? Like, this isn't even not thinking of these as consumer harms, or, the problems of monopolies in the tech industry. But of course, now we have one of the most ardent advocates of tech regulation that there is in Lena Khan, the new chair of the Federal Trade Commission that was appointed by President Biden, which is fantastic. I mean, who could have ever imagined? We have, Rohit Chopra, who is the director of the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, who was the minority voice on the FTC for many years, focused explicitly on the tech sector and its harm to consumers. And now he's leading the Consumer Finance Protection Bureau, and they're going hard on the most dangerous dimensions of the tech industry to the public. So I think there's lots of good people now, and we have a language and we have thousands of researchers around the country who are doing really important, granular, specific work that helps inform public policy. But we cannot keep up at the rate of the implementation and the investment in harmful technologies. And of course, the United States being a safe harbor to some of the worst kinds of technology products and companies, is also part of the problem. I mean, we have been one of the last modern democracies to regulate the tech industry, and we've also been a safe harbor to some of the worst actors. So, there's a lot of work to be done, but I feel, even with all of that, much more hopeful than I felt a decade ago when it was very difficult to make these issues legible.
Mhm. Mhm. Sarah, did you want to comment on?
Yeah, I mean, I'll also add a couple of things, which is that, first of all, I can co-sign the difficulty that Safiya had in making these arguments and advancing them. We both were suggesting areas of research and proposing them, and then demonstrating with evidence the validity of our claims. At a time in which it was met with total skepticism. And so if you think back about 15 plus years ago, at the sort of the when social media technologies were really on the rise, and in the first part of their widespread adoption, the idea was that it was a mechanism by which people, particularly in the United States at that time, because this is based on principles that are enshrined in the culture in the United States, that using social media was in essence a mechanism by which one could exercise one's First Amendment right to free expression. Now, the idea that a private company with a branded space whose revenue model is directly tied to advertising by third parties would ever provide a space for unfettered freedom of expression is preposterous on its face when we think about it, right? It would be akin to the CBS studio in downtown Los Angeles running a live broadcast, throwing the doors open to the studio and inviting anybody in from the street to have their say. It's just not going to happen. So, but the companies had made such a tacit and oftentimes overt claim that they were in essence the new public square, that it was no fault of individual people to think that that was the case. And certainly for the most part, they experienced these platforms as such. But the platforms went to great pains to obfuscate all of the manipulation that went on behind the scenes, to include the process of content moderation by human actors, but also extended now to that same type of process being undertaken by computation, and certainly by AI. So it was an uphill battle, first of all, to disabuse people of their received notions about the benevolence of these companies in the first place. And Safiya was tackling it from one end, and I was tackling it from another. But both of our positions were highly unpopular because people wanted to cling to those stories. They were exciting, they were liberatory, and they seemed to align with what we thought of as American values in some ways. Now, for some communities, skepticism around those values has been present in their own relationship to the United States for much longer and in much more significant ways than among other groups and populations. But I think the companies did a great job of suggesting that the platforms were also a mechanism by which there could be a flattening of hierarchy, let's say, or the ability to circulate your ideas was going to be predicated on the strength of your ideas. Now, if you've been on X lately, we certainly know that smart ideas or truthful information doesn't necessarily rise to the top. That's not exactly the criterion that is used, right? So I think mapping for others and understanding not only of the commercial content moderation practices and what that wrought on human beings who did this low wage, low status work. And I will just, cut to the chase by saying it tends to be profound psychological damage that is the outcome of that work. Not only did I want to map that for people, but I wanted to take a step back and talk about the economic model that was at play and why that model did not necessarily put primacy on the very best information or the most reliable information, or that it would value some vetted source over another. And the simple reason is because these are platforms that require new material 24/7 in order to have users come back and stay engaged on the platforms in order to deliver those users to their advertising partners. So the model really was hoover it all up, suck it all up into the platform. There's going to be a lot of stuff we don't want, and we're going to put that on the least valued people within our company, or they may be so undervalued that we're going to hire them as third-party contractors. We're not even going to consider them, let's say, Facebook employees or YouTube employees, but they'll work for a third party, maybe somewhere else in the world, like the Philippines or India or Poland, other places that are already economically disadvantaged in some regards, or who have a large sector of people who will do work of this nature because it's a step up from their other options. But this also took place, by the way, in Iowa, in rural Iowa. That was the first case that I knew of content moderation work of this nature. So part of the early thing that I think Safiya and I both did was to reframe a narrative that would help people make sense of things that they saw that without any kind of interrogation would be received as just the way things are, let's say. And in fact, what we wanted to demonstrate was that there were a series of choices, and choices, again, as Safiya mentioned, value-laden choices, decision-making that went into what we finally saw in our search results, or as what rose to the top of our feed on social media. These were not incidental things. They were also not predicated on the best. There were other measures that went into play. And one of the important things I think for both of us is the fact that those decisions and that sorting is a highly human process, that a computer is simply, and an algorithm in particular, is simply an abstraction. It's an abstraction of human processes. It's an abstraction of thought. It's a highly trained and can be very sophisticated bit of code that is designed to produce a result, but that's in the context of all possible results and all possible sorting and all possible decision making, right? So the way even these things get framed up have to be decided upon at some point. And that was getting lost in the dialogue we were having. Very early on, I went to visit the the National Center for Supercomputing Applications, which is at the University of Illinois. It's where NCSA Mosaic came from. If you use that early web browser, it's where Telnet came from. So it's really at the fore of a lot of internet technologies that we still use today. And I went to a space there that was a visualization lab because I wanted to talk to the person who ran it about really what was the potential for computers to, let's say, do a significant portion of content moderation as I was thinking about it, which was to evaluate at that time, it was mostly still image, but let's think about, an image or a picture and make a decision about it. And I explained the kind of problem space to him and articulated what I was thinking about, there's this legion of human beings doing this. Is there a reason that we would be using humans rather than computation to this? And he listened very intently. And then he gestured at an oak table sitting in the middle of this room. And he said, "See that table?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Well, right now we're working on ensuring that the computer can reliably detect that table as a table." So in other words, obviously we've come leaps and bounds from that point back in 2010. But the point was, there's something special about human cognition and about sense making and about articulation of symbols and ideas in context put together that humans have. And when we use computers, we have to remember that they're doing their best to imitate that human cognition. That's what they're doing. And oftentimes, it turns out it's less expensive, or the word I would really use is it's cheaper to use humans to do this kind of work. So there's also a question here of like, why are we so invested as a culture in a narrative that computation is always better and preferable? Because sometimes it's not. All right, I'll leave it there.
But with that, because you brought up an interesting point with now there's a need for content moderation. And I wanted to go back to both of you. What sounded the alarm? So can you give an example of the types of content that you were seeing that really showed that there was some biases in these algorithms? And now, you know, there's this whole new workforce of content moderators. And it just seems like there's so much being put into fixing a problem that maybe shouldn't have been designed that way to begin with. But if you can talk a little bit about just what you saw and also what you're seeing today.
Sure. So let me just give a little context. I was, Sarah and I were both in an information school getting PhDs in information science alongside all kinds of information specialists, librarians, computer scientists, kind of a broad group of people. And the questions were really about for me, were things like, what does it mean that something like a search engine is remaking the way the public thinks about accessing information and knowledge, where other longstanding kinds of reliable resources, let's say like a library or an academic library, university library, or people with PhDs and deep subject matter expertise, hobbyists who know a lot, that we're kind of going, and we were living through the zeitgeist of shifting our perception of where valuable knowledge lives into something like a search engine. So I found that incredibly fascinating, that, this is the moment where we have the rise of the phrase, just Google it. Every teacher, every parent, everybody at work is like, I don't know, just Google it to get the answer, believing that the definitive answers would rise to the top. And that, there were really important studies that were happening in the early, 2010, 2012, around people's belief in the veracity of a search engine, where, upwards of beyond 70% of people who use search engines believed that what they got there on the first page was the most credible, the most reliable. And again, remember, we told these origin stories. We had previously been mining through these complex directories, trying to find information, going into an AOL chat room. Anybody here know anything about the Civil War? Like these kinds of methods that we were using to find information online. And now all of a sudden, there's this clean white page with a simple interface and box. You can type in a couple of words and boom, you think that some engineers and experts have gone through millions of websites to give you the most reliable things that you get on the first page. And of course, in some cases that was true. Where's the closest Starbucks? It's going to give you the right answer. Anything of kind of a commercial nature that was tied to their advertisers, but people were not engaging with these technologies as if they were ad tech. And of course, that was a very important distinction that had to be brought out. So for me, what I did in my first study is I took the US Census, I took every racial and ethnic category, and I crossed it by genders that were available on the census as well. And I looked to see what happened. And lo and behold, every time there was a search that included the word girl, and especially girls, the majority of the results that came to the first page were pornography or hypersexualized kinds of results. And they very much mapped to the kind of racial hierarchy that we live in the United States, with kind of white supremacy at the top, and the binary to that being kind of anti-Blackness. And you found that as you kind of cascaded that hierarchy that we live in society, that the most brutal, the most repulsive kinds of representation were ascribed to Black women, and then Latina women, and then Asian women, and white women. And so there was a lot to unpack about why is it that women and girls were so easily pornified in these sites. And this is for many years. I mean, Google, unfortunately, I feel sorry for the engineers. Somebody just like threw my book on some engineering team's desk and was like, fix it. Because I had many dozens of examples of grotesquely racist and sexist stereotyping of all kinds of people, all kinds of occupations, all kinds of ideas. And so this is, to me, was like foundational to like provide a big body of evidence to show that as soon as you start asking these kinds of systems social questions, what happens is the industries, for example, the porn industry, which has more money than any industry, maybe right next to the tech industry, could control a lot of narratives about a lot of ideas. But also, and this was borrowing from the work of people like Jesse Daniels, who'd written earlier about the early internet and white supremacists and white nationalists and racism on the internet, that those communities were also extremely well organized and, believe it or not, well funded. And they too could control a lot of narratives, game those narratives to the front page, at the top of the pile about Jewish people. You would find lots of Holocaust denial and anti-Semitism when you would search for Jewish people on the front page. So what does this mean then in the context of every parent, every teacher, every coworker saying, just Google it to get answers? Well, fast forward, you have the architecture of these kinds of logics that are deeply manipulated and able to be manipulated. Let me be clear, because any search company that's building products that can be manipulated to this degree by the highest bidders with their, their AdWords and other kinds of systems that allow the highest bidders to be able to dominate, means that now you have a Gen AI kind of interface on top of all those logics. And you're seeing, of course, I mean, Google's been in very hot water with Gemini and Bard and the nonsensical kinds of information that is displayed through those technologies. ChatGPT not being much better, other kinds of art generators that are in the headlines, quite frankly, every week with deeply disturbing kinds of information and images that are coming through. And, to think about the application of that now using what was designed to be like chatbots, more sophisticated chatbots, which is really what these technologies, that was the auspices under which they raised billions of dollars to build these companies, now being the backbone of every major institution, every major company. I mean, literally, are people do they have a death wish for their organizations? I mean, that's all I can ask myself is like, if you're using it for more than some type of very simple customer service interface, and you're using it to somehow give you better predictive logics for your business or for your organization, your university, your school, I think you're putting your business and your goods in a very speculative marketplace that is going to potentially be incredibly damaging, because these two are systems that can be deeply gamed. And this, I think, will be the site of cybersecurity kinds of threats and issues. I think putting, again, so many of our systems, like deeply embedding them is going to be, a catastrophe for some businesses and some companies. It's probably very cute for Instagram influencers to generate content and have it all synced up so they can do digital affiliate marketing. But I think if you're putting, Chase Bank, like fully integrating it with generative AI or the banking system or Wall Street, I think that we're going to see a lot of consequences in the future.
And Safiya, let's add to it the origin of the engines that are serving this up, right? Let's talk about ChatGPT or any of the other ones that you mentioned. I mean, does anybody out there know where that large language model mostly sourced its knowledge base from? Anybody know? Put it in the chat if you know.
The internet.
Yeah, the internet. And we got a winner here. Reddit. Now Reddit has cleaned up its act significantly in the past few years, and it's such that it just had an IPO, right? But how many of you feel confident that you're always going to get the right information on Reddit? Like, do you want to put your medical your medical care in those hands? Do you want to put, again, like Safiya mentioned, your financial care? Do you want to write a paper on the backbone of information that comes from there? Yeah. And your crazy uncle's X postings, or, in some cases, they've tried to go with more legitimate information by doing things like, this was what Meta did, use my book and Safiya's book and the book of other scholars for their LLM model, effectively stealing them and creating a large language model based on the work that many people have done. So even, even when it's better sourced information or, better vetted or whatever, there are still real problems with how these engines are developed and the auspices under which they're created. And then here's where I will bring back the issue of what so many people in leadership in companies see as a benefit to these tools. And it's very simple. It's very simple. They see it ultimately as a labor reduction strategy. And I'm here to tell you that you can't ever have no labor. You can't. There are people in the production chain somewhere. The question becomes, how do we value those people and their efforts? And where do we put them? And how do we acknowledge their input? So for ChatGPT's LLM engine, the thing that drives ChatGPT, because they sourced it from Reddit and other quarters of the internet, there was all kinds of crap in there. Things that were really not only unpleasant or sort of coarse or whatever, but things that were actually harmful if they got embedded into the larger engine. And so what was the strategy to deal with it? Well, the strategy was to hire a whole bunch of people in Africa, in Kenya, to build an adversarial model, or in other words, a model that would interact with that larger LLM as the bad stuff, like extract all that stuff out and create a model that says, this is the stuff that you shouldn't be drawing from. In order to do that, those people had to be immersed and mired within the very worst stuff on the internet, just text-based. And even that was causing people to have psychological damage to the point that they could no longer work. So it's not like you get humans out of the loop. The humans are always there. We're human beings. Everything is about humanity at some level of abstraction. It's about what we think of the relative worth of humans. Are we willing to, have hundreds of thousands of people at any given moment combing through abuse, beheadings, child sexual exploitation material, violence and gore, etc., just because Facebook needs fresh stuff for selling its, advertising? And I will also say one other thing about the Gen AI products, which is that, I don't know how many of you've noticed this, but they're often not all that they're cracked up to be. Like, have you ever seen a weird photo, I don't know, of say the Princess of Wales that seemed funny, or you saw something else? A lot of advertising now will be created using Gen AI tools. There is an uncanny valley effect within these technologies as well. And people are uncomfortable seeing weird stuff that does not look like the output of any human being. It's very obviously machine generated. And the experience that many people have to that is one of a negative affect or of recoiling from it or thinking, that has turned me off from that product, right? I guess the calculus on the part of companies that use stuff like that is that it's, just catching one person out of 1,000 in the cheapness of that advertising is worth it. But I'm here to say that my money is on backlash against this kind of stuff. My money is on slow computing. My money is on human generated outputs that people can relate to better, in the same way that the fast food industry, which still thrives, has had to contend with something called the slow food movement, right? Farm to table, growing things locally where you can identify the source and you can understand how things moved from a farm through production and finally made its way onto your dinner plate. So I think there's going to be, from a market perspective, opportunities in that realm that actually push against this kind of cheapening of all human self-expression, which is really, at the end of the day, what both of the cases that we're talking about have done, and which Gen AI is further doing. I mean, there was just a report about how many paper mill kind of journals are now publishing papers with things that are sentences that Chat GPT generated, like, clearly I will be able to respond to your prompt, and people put that right in papers and send them off to paper mill type bogus publications. And that gets, what happens to that? It gets picked back up by LLMs, right? Yeah, Safiya's like, and there's the cycle of garbage repeats and grows. So if we care at all about like the cultural output, the collective knowledge, like, we are in a moment of crisis around the veracity of information. This is worrisome, right?
It is. I want to read something that came out of ChatGPT, and I also want to turn it, and I'll turn it back to the two of you to give your advice to this group of women in technology, because I think women don't feel like they have the power to make a change. And as you're getting this information, it's really about shifting the story and the narrative through your own innovative and creative mindset. So ChatGPT in itself, it does give us, it's a warning label. I asked, what are the concerns of generative AI for women in underrepresented communities? And in short, it gave me 7 different responses, but one of them was very interesting. It said, Gen AI may be responsible for bias and stereotyping, privacy and security issues, misinformation and harmful content, ethical use and accountability, job displacement and economic equity, lack of representation in AI development. I thought that was very concerning that it's speaking of itself. And, but I do want to turn it over. We have tobacco products, for example, that now have warning labels that say, hey, I cause cancer. Do Gen AI products, one, need to have warning labels? And also, what is your advice to this group if they were to create, one tech product or do one creative thing or focus on one initiative to help to make a positive narrative? What would that one thing be in your opinion?
Well, first, I want to just really make sure that everyone in this call understands that the reason we are having so many of these conversations about the harm of tech writ large has been because women have been at the forefront of that conversation. Women scholars, women journalists, that is an unequivocal fact. I stand by it. I got the citations to prove it. So I want to make sure that, we understand we're actually not at the tail end of this conversation trying to sort it out. We're at the forefront of this conversation and leading it. And all of the leading regulators around the world have also been women. The people in Congress who are leading, the best bills are also women. So, and LGBTQ people, non-binary people. So I want to just make sure that we're oriented into how we got here to these conversations, and that we maintain the sense of leadership in this position, in this conversation, because I think that women have actually been providing the leadership nationally and internationally. So I just want to level set on that. The second thing is, I think that, for me right now, I believe that we are in a very important moment of paradigm shift. So we had, for the last decade, we had a number of us who shifted the paradigm such that we could even be in a conversation about harm and tech, right? That we're in these kind of what is happening at the intersection of data and society kinds of conversations. And I think the response to that has been a wholesale kind of capture by bad actors in industry, quite frankly, and academia, who have kind of captured those words and said, like, oh, well, we'll put a warning label, or we'll say that there are some things you should be concerned about. And they've kind of embraced the criticisms and said, we'll be in charge of fixing the problems that we know are present. And so they're doing that with these kinds of like disclaimers. But listen, Web 1 and 2.0 also had disclaimers. Okay. And that didn't stop them from their business models and business practices. So, the thing that I think we have a responsibility to do as researchers and people around industry and university is to shift once again the ground that we're standing on around what kinds of things should be made illegal. Where are the explicit civil and human rights violations, undermining of worker rights and labor protections? We need to be naming those things, because we do, in fact, have some laws on the books to protect us when those harms are present. And that is very important. And we need to put more laws on the books. The truth is, if we don't have public policy, if we don't have case law that judges can adjudicate against in courts, and we don't have like any type of enforcement mechanisms, then really, like the tobacco industry, they can continue to make harmful products and they just offshore them to other countries. We had a really powerful paradigm shift. I try to tell my undergrads in class, and I'm like, I'm sure the doctor like had a cigarette just like this when I was being pushed out. Do you understand what I'm saying? Like, doctors would smoke in the ER. Okay. The students cannot believe that's such a paradigm shift that we've had. All of us Gen Xers, we
9 out of 10
100%
doctors pick Pall Mall. Safiya.
I mean, I'm sure my mom like chain smoked 2 packs of cigarettes, in the hospital. But that has been a big paradigm shift, where we have regulated the way in which those harmful products can circulate, because it's not just if you smoke, there are secondary and tertiary effects of tobacco products. And the same, you can't just quit using these technologies. You are caught in these systems in many, many ways, whether you know it or not. So this is very important. But it's not just pushing those now to new markets outside of the United States and letting the global South, for example, or the global majority deal with the problems. We have to learn from these past histories and these interventions and do better. And I think that we will probably look back in 50 years and say, I can't believe we let it go down like that. The same way we look back at things like the period of the slaveocracy and enslavement in the Americas, and we say, how did people let that stand for 200 years? Like, well, it was abolitionists. It was a small majority, a very small handful, small minority of people who pushed really hard for different kinds of policies and economies. And I think we are in that moment around so many of these new technologies. And that gives me a lot of hope. I just hope it won't take us 200 years to get to the bottom of that.
Yeah, I will just quickly say that if we wait for the tech industry to self-regulate, we will be waiting a long time, because that is not where change will emanate from. It comes from advocacy, and it comes from demands on the part of society. General Motors and Ford were not interested in putting seatbelts in their cars. They didn't do it because they just felt like it was the right thing to do. It was because people were getting thrown through windshields, killed in their vehicles, et cetera, and they were unsafe at any speed, right? So it takes advocacy and it takes concerted effort. Now, one of the problems we have right now in our congressional makeup in the federal government is that the biggest lobbyists in DC are Amazon and Meta. So a lot of our government officials are captured. When Jim Jordan talks about a bias against conservatives in tech, I have to laugh because the guy owes his entire career to the Twitterocracy or to the right-wing information economy. So they're not serious about this stuff. It's really a distraction, and the change will have to come from elsewhere, and it will have to probably come from the ground up. The thing that I would say to folks who are joining us today, so many of whom are innovators in these spaces, is what I said before, which is just that there are openings for other ways to imagine your products and services that buck trends. And it turns out that sometimes doing that can be also lucrative and have remuneration for you as a leader. But it takes nerve and it takes convincing, and you will definitely be against the grain in doing that. There's upsides to that as well, and it's not just financial, right? Like, you have to live with yourself when it comes to the products that you create as well. And we've been there too.
Thank you both. We could go on for weeks on this discussion topic, but I wanted to highlight, a very important thing, that these are social systems. We're talking about systems that impact people that are on a technology platform, and I think it's important to recognize that. So I want to thank Sarah and Safiya for today's session. Snejana, if you can pull up the slide for our next session, I would appreciate it. We have another event coming up very soon. While that's happening, I am going to put in the chat where you can learn more about these two wonderful women from their websites.
Yeah, and I will also say, the email box is open. Just give me a minute to get through it. But I'm always happy to meet with and consult and talk with people who want to make change out in the world, because that's actually where the rubber meets the road for so much of what we've talked about today.
Thank you. Okay, so there we go. There are their websites. Okay, if you go to the next slide, Snejana, please. Okay. The one before. Okay, so we have another session on generative AI and cybersecurity that's happening on April the 10th. That's going to be in person at CNSI. And summer solstice event is going to be on technology and LA 28. And that will be June 13th. And this Breakthrough Tech AI is a wonderful program. It's something that it teaches. It's a 12-month program that is dedicated to women who are learning data science, AI, ML, to get more women into these fields. It is hosted by UCLA. It includes UCLA students, but includes students across different universities, not just in the LA area, but also nationally. And it's an excellent program. And again, we need more women in these fields, designing these systems to make them more beneficial to humanity. So with that, we will close for today. Thank you again, ladies, Safiya and Sarah. We are so grateful for the research that you've done over the decades and what you continue to do to inform us better. So thank you.
Thanks so much. Thanks for having us.
Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.